This video lecture supplements a workbook for Beck's Introduction to SQL Programming, the Pelican Companion. The corresponding textbook is Beck's Introduction to SQL Programming, that Pelican database book. The workbook and printed copy of the companion textbook may be purchased from lulu.com. You may download the textbook for free in ebook format from beckplanet.com/books. Important note on SQL Server and MySQL. The material presented supports both the SQL Server and MySQL environments. Where differences in SQL dialect and environment arise, solutions for both environments will be demonstrated. Where the SQL code is common across environments, only one environment is used for demonstration, as the code runs identically in the other environment. Chapter 7 Parallel Exercises Solution Walkthrough with Commentary. Part 2 of 3. Preparation. Make certain you have connected to your DBMS, SQL Server or MySQL, using your query client, e.g. SSMS or MySQL Workbench. If the Candy database already exists, it's a good idea to start by dropping and recreating it so that everything is in the expected startup state. Run the Candy database creation script appropriate to your DBMS, SQL Server or MySQL. Review the script execution results to ensure that the database and its data were successfully created. Parallel Exercise 6. Using the Candy database, write a stored procedure to list only the order number, order date, client number, and client name for the orders whose order number value is provided by a parameter. Name your procedure USP underscore find underscore by underscore order ID. In Parallel Exercise 6, we're going to address a very common business task, and that is we're going to parameterize a query to provide a database-centric, very efficient, quick lookup on a parameter. And this is going to be a parameter to let us specify an order number and then quickly return the order number, the order date, the client number, and name. And so, as usual, I like to begin building a stored procedure by starting with a specific case of a query with specific data and then replace that specific data with the variables and parameters to generalize the case. And then we'll go ahead and save that once it's working as a stored procedure. So let's start out with our select from where pattern, and we're going to be selecting from the orders table. Let's alias that as O. The client table, let's alias that as C. And what we'd like to select are the order number, the order date, the client num. And just a reminder, the reason that some of my fields are fully qualified with the table name, the alias for the table, and some are not, is that if it's common to both tables or all the more than one of the tables that we're referencing, we need to disambiguate it, make clear to the query processor which table we are referencing to get that particular field value. And the client name, good. And this is going to be where the client num is equal to the client num. So there's our join. And where the order num and let's start with making that equal to 51642 and see if that works. I'd look that up ahead of time, and that should work. Also, I need to make sure that I've set the context. I'm using the database schema I intend, so I'm just going to say use Candy down here real good. Real quickly, I don't remember if I did that before starting the video recording. So I'm just going to run that selection. Good. Okay, so now I've got the context set. And let's go ahead and run this query as it stands right now, see if that's working. and it is. I'm getting order 51642 and the date, the client number, and the client name. So that's all lovely. Now what we'd like to do is make this value replaceable. And so let's replace that with a variable, and we preface a variable or parameter with @ in Transact SQL for use with SQL Server or num. And then, of course, we need to get that declared somewhere. So up here, let's create the procedure, give it the desired name, and then on the following line, you could put it on the same line. I like it on the following line. I think the code is a little bit easier to follow when you're reading and understanding it if you put the parameter on the following line, @ or num, and that is going to be an integer value, and the reason for that is that matches what the field data type is that we'll be comparing that with, so that's a smart thing to do. And then we'll define that stored procedure as the query that we had already tested with the change that we've now got the replaceable parameter there. And so let's take all of this and let's run that. So first I'm going to come down here, and so it's really clear, I'm going to clear the contents of my results window, and let's go ahead and run that query. And what we expect is that nothing here is going to be returned. We just want to make sure that it builds the stored procedure correctly. And so I look in there and it looks like nothing was returned, no rows, there are no warnings. And so everything ran as expected to create that. As a matter of fact, we can come up here and expand our Candy database, and we could refresh the view. And one of the things we should see is that now it has the stored procedure that we created, find by order. It exists, and that's what we would expect to see. So that looks like everything has worked correctly. Now we want to go ahead and test this, and so let's go ahead and call it, and the call keyword is exec in SQL Server. And so we're going to exec that for the value 51642, and let's run not the code up here to create the query, but just the code to run that stored procedure with that value. And so run the selection, and that executes correctly. So very nice. That is working as expected. And again, the syntax is going to be a little bit different for a MySQL implementation. So we'll address the differences in the next video. All right, so let's modify this stored procedure that we've been developing for use in the MySQL platform. And I've trimmed this back a little bit so that it has just the common elements, the generic SQL that are common to both platforms. And now we're going to clean up and add the elements that are specific to MySQL. So in MySQL, generally we start by replacing the delimiter, so that we're going to parse this on the / for code breaks rather than semicolon. And then we'll go ahead and create the procedure. And in MySQL, in order to define the parameter, we need to tell it it's an input parameter. It's going to be named ordnum, so we don't use the @ sign to denote a parameter as we would for parameters and variables in SQL Server. But we do specify the data type, and that's going to match the field that we're going to be working against with the ordnum value, so that makes sense. And then let's start with a begin block, and for every begin block, we should have a matching end block. So down at the bottom of our code, we'll put the end, and there's our delimiter denoting that that's the end of the batch. And then when we're all done with that, of course, we should clean up and tell the system to go back using its standard delimiter. And let's see, do we have everything in the query as we need it? Yes, I think that we do, except we need to replace the ordnum value here in the filter. And so now we should have everything working there. Let's go ahead and clean up the results window. And let's highlight this and see if we can run this selection. Oh, and it tells me I have no database selected, and that's because I have neglected, when I started this session before starting the video, I neglected to tell it what schema we're working with. So let's tell it use Candy. And I'll just highlight that right quick and run just that selection. And now that it has context, again, let me clear this window. Now, if we run our code, I'm just going to run that selection. And I have a syntax error near end. Oh, yeah. Forgot to end the statement. And let's give that a try. Third time pays for all. Yes, and this time that ran as expected. No rows are returned, no warnings, but the stored procedure was created. And the way, again, that I can know that is I come up to my Candy database, make sure it's been refreshed, expand it. I should see that the stored procedure has now been created. Okay. So now we can test it. Let's go ahead and exercise that. And recall that instead of exec, the call keyword for MySQL is simply call, and that we pass that parameter in parentheses with the function name or the stored procedure name. So we're going to call USP find my by order ID, and we're going to look for 51642. Let's highlight that, run just that selection, and there we go. And we have the order num, the order date, the client num, and the client name. So that's working perfectly. Parallel exercise 7. Using the Candy database, write a stored procedure to add a row to the orders table. Name your stored procedure USP add order. Your procedure should accept two parameters in order to add the order ID and customer ID. Be sure to set the order date to the current date. You can obtain the current date using the getDate function, SQL Server, or the currentDate function, MySQL. All right, let's take a look at parallel exercise 7, and by now the astute student will probably have noticed that we're working our way through stored procedures with CRUD. So CRUD being create, update, delete patterns. So we're going through, and we've seen how to return a result or inquire or do a query. We're going to see how to update, insert new data, and delete using stored procedures. So at this point, we're going to do a simple insert. And that's pretty straightforward, so we'll accelerate this a little bit. The one twist here is that what we want to do in inserting a new order is we want to default the order date to the current date. And that could have been done with something called a trigger, but we're going to insert that manually in our stored procedure. And so what we'd like to do is automate so that the operator doesn't have to correctly enter the current date or current time each time they run this stored procedure. So let's just take a look at the function. And on the SQL Server platform, the function that we're going to use is getDate. And so let's just demonstrate that right quick. We can do a simple select of getDate function, open paren, close paren. And I'm not even going to specify a table. We're just going to get it right from the system by default, and we expect the result to show up here. And let's test that that function works correctly. So I'm going to run that selection, and boom, that's the current date and time as of the point I'm making this video. Okay, so that all looks good. And so, not to belabor the point, usually my pattern is to go through with the specific value and then to automate it for a very, very simple insert statement like that. I don't think we need to do that. You know the pattern for the insert statement at this point. So we're going to insert into the orders table order num, order date, and client num. And the values that we're going to put in there are going to be the ordnum parameter value that is provided to us. And then we're going to use that getDate function and stick that into the order date. And then the second parameter value provided to us, clinum. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. And let's see here. Anything else we need to do with SQL Server? No, let's go ahead and just go for the gusto. Let's do it all. So there's the create procedure. We're going to add this procedure as USP add order. And it's defined as this insert statement with these parameters. Oh, there's the extra thing we need to do that I've forgotten about, is we need to declare those parameters. So let's have @ordnum as an integer value and @clinum as an integer value. And again, you could do this all on one line. I think it makes the code a little bit more readable as a matter of style to put those on the following line. It really makes no difference to the computer. And let's see if we can create that and if it creates correctly. So again, I'll clear out my results window here. Let's go ahead and run that selection. And it looks like it was created correctly. Again, we can double check that. If we expand Candy, come up here, let's refresh it, expand it again, and we see that the add order stored procedure has been added to it. So let's go ahead and exercise it a little bit. And I like this because we're going to use one of our previously created stored procedures to help us very quickly see that it is working rather than having to write a new query. We're going to exec the stored procedure to add order 999 and clinum to 60, and it'll automatically be at the current date. But then to test that, we will just run the stored procedure that we created previously until it go find order 999. And we can do that all in one batch, very efficient. So let's go ahead and run that. Oh, must have run this before. I already had, I ran the whole thing instead of just running the selection. That's why it's saying, hey, you can't create it again. There's already a stored procedure out there. So that was the error there. Let's clean this up. And the reason I don't edit my videos to make them perfect is because that's not how you're going to be experiencing this as you're working through. You're going to make some common mistakes. So when I make those common mistakes, I'm not perfect, but I like to use them as a teachable moment and say, oh, I made that mistake. How did I figure out what was going on? Here's the explanation for what that problem is. I hope that's useful to you. Now, let's run this selection again. And now it added it, and we see that it added it because there's 999. This is the current date as of the date I'm making this video. And here is the client number and the client name, and so that all worked beautifully. All right, so now let's engineer the solution to parallel exercise 7 for the MySQL platform. And I've preserved the essence of the common structure for the SQL Server version. I've added a begin and an end block here, and we just need to complete the parameters for our insert statement. Before we look at that, let's take a look at the difference in the way that we obtain the current date for MySQL as opposed to how that's done in SQL Server. So we want the current date function, and let's demonstrate that. So if we could just do a select on the current date, let's run that selection, and we get the current date as of the day I'm making this video. And so we see how that's working. Let's go ahead and I'm going to preserve that, copy it to the clipboard, because I'm going to use that here in one of my values. It's going to be the second value there. And then let's add the parameters that we're going to be inputting. So ordnum is the first input parameter, and the second one will be clinum. And let's add those to the procedure call. And we have to specify that those are input parameters in the case of MySQL. Ordnum, and the data type is going to be an int. And clinum, also an int. And again, if you're wondering why there's not a third parameter when we're making three changes here, let me remind you that current date is not a parameter. It's a function. It's a fixed value that we're going to call, I say fixed value, it's a dynamic value that is generated from the current system date, but it isn't provided as input value to the stored procedure. Only ordnum and clinum are, so that's why we have three here and only two up here. Okay, so let's take a look. The other thing we ought to do for good form is change our delimiter so we don't trip over the semicolons in the SQL, and clean up when we're done in that there. And now we should be able to run that and build that stored procedure. Let's run it. And what's my error? It says I have SQL error 1064. I have a SQL error in the syntax, and it is, somewhere in the call. Oh, there's no space after the dashes, so that's not actually properly a comment. So if this errored out down here, that probably errored out after the rest of this ran successfully. Let's take a look and see if that was created. Yeah, so see, the add order actually was created. Let's see how to drop that. That's a good exercise. So let's go ahead and drop that and run that again so we can see it run without an error. And now let's run our query to create the stored procedure, and that should run without error. Yay, and it does. And now if we come back to Candy and we refresh things and we take a look, we should see, yes, we have the stored procedure to add the order. And now let's go ahead and test that. So we'll add stored procedure. Well, the stored procedure is going to add the order 999 for client number 260. And we're going to go ahead and call the previously created stored procedure to then retrieve and display that. So let's just highlight that and exercise our stored procedures. And I'm confused. Let's see. Why does it say that the order at USP add order? Oh, ha ha ha. Ah, all right. I like this troubleshooting in real time. So the add order is not the same as add orders. See that I made a typo here in creating that. And if I look at my original problem statement, I am supposed to create a procedure called add order. Name your stored procedure USP add order. So it should not be named in the plural. It should be add order. And indeed, it was named that. So in calling that, that's my error. So that's the only thing I need to change. Everything else is correct. Let's try running that again. And now it's running correctly. Okay. So good. Little things like that. Again, I'm very fallible. Everybody can make some mistakes. And so I try to leave them in my videos so that they will show you, number one, that through the magic of video editing is about the only way someone can appear to be perfect. And secondly, when you run into these things, how do you solve your problems? How do you debug? So I hope that's useful to you. Alrighty.
Parallel Exercise 8. Candy Company allows clients to modify their orders until the date they are picked and packed. However, when a customer requests a change, Candy changes the order date to the current date, which sends the order to the back of the queue as orders are picked and packed oldest first. Write a stored procedure to change the order date of the order whose number is supplied as a parameter to the order ID variable to the current date. Name your stored procedure USP UPD order date.
In parallel exercise 8, we're going to turn a simple update query into a stored procedure. And what we need to do here is set an order's date to the current date from whatever it was previously. So we're updating the order date. And so this is a simple update set where pattern. And what we're going to want to do is to work on the order date. So we're going to set the order date to some expression. And we're updating the orders table. And the filter for that is where the order number is equal to a provided parameter ordnum. Okay. And let's think about what are we setting the order date to? Well, we're setting it to the current date, and we know from previous exercises that in a SQL Server, we want the getDate function that will get us the current date. And so there's the core logic. And here is the name of our stored procedure. And we need to provide the parameter that we've referenced at ordnum. And that is an integer data type. And we're going to create that stored procedure as defined by this query that we've just written. And that's pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and run that. And we should see that create with no problems. And we do. We can double check it. Go ahead and refresh the Candy database and see that we now have the update order date stored procedure. And now let's test that and make sure it's working as we expect. So let's create a record to work on rather than working on one of the existing records. So we can just do a simple insert, and we're going to insert into orders 888 get date -1. So basically you'll set it to yesterday um, and for customer 260. So let's go ahead and run that. I'll highlight that and tell it to run that selection. And that ran without error. And we can, of course, go ahead and test that using a stored procedure we've already written, which is the find by order. And let's go ahead and put that and see that that comes up correctly. So we'll run that selection. And so as I write this or record this video, the date is the 10th. So here's yesterday's date as of today is the 9th. So we want to see that updated to the 10th. And so let's go ahead and exec the new procedure that we've created. And that should change 8888 to the current day. So we should see this change from the order date of the 9th to the 10th. Let's run that. And indeed, that's updated it to today's date. Solving parallel exercise 8 for the MySQL platform is only modestly different than doing so for SQL Server. So we're going to preserve most of the core structure of our stored procedure and the query that we'd previously created. And so let's simply come in to the create procedure and let's change the parameters and specify an input parameter ordnum of type integer. And let's put in a begin block and match it with an end block. And of course we should, for good form, set our delimiter. And the distinctions here in our update query is that the order date is going to be set to the different parameter name here, which is going to be ordnum. I'm sorry, the order date is going to be the MySQL date function, current date. Where the order num equals the input parameter ordnum. And that should give us what we need. Let's clean up our delimiter when we're done. And let's run that. We should see no output per se on the current selection. Oh, I haven't set my database yet. Usually I do that before I start the video. So let's just come down here, use Candy, run that selection. Now we're set. And again, let's run that selection. I've got to terminate my batch. Here we go. It's always the little things. Let's run that selection one last time. Go ahead and clear this so we're very clear on what's happened. Run the selection. There we go. Now it's happy. And again, if we go to Candy and make sure we've refreshed, we should see that the USP update order date stored procedure has been created. And now let's go ahead and test it. So first, let's put a record in we can have for testing. So let's create this record. And there was one row created. We can prove that out by calling the find on that record. On that selection, we see that's there with yesterday's date. As I make this video, it is the 10th, and so there's the 9th. And now if we call the stored procedure and then call the find by order ID to display it, let's run that selection, and we see that it has indeed updated the record to the 10th, and everything is working as expected.
Parallel exercise 9. Using the Candy database, write a stored procedure to delete the order whose number is stored in the ordnum parameter. Name your stored procedure USP del order.
For parallel exercise number 9, we're going to take a simple delete query and parameterize that for use in a stored procedure. And so our typical pattern for a delete query is delete from and where. And so we're going to be deleting here from the orders table. The deletion is just delete, and the where is based on an order num filter, and that's going to be equal to some parameter ordnum that we will provide. So let's go ahead and build the create statement, and let's add the parameter at ordnum, and the type will be integer, and we'll create that as defined by this query. And that should be it. Let's go ahead and run that and see if it creates correctly. And it appears to. Check the Candy database. And let's see in the objects we have delete order. Okay. And so let's start by making sure that we have an order that we want to delete. We'd previously added 8888. So let's execute the stored procedure to find that order ID 8888. So I'll run that selection, and there it exists. Okay, so knowing that it exists, if I then run the stored procedure to delete order 8888, we should see that it disappears. And let's see if that is true. We'll run that selection, and no results are returned, so that has been deleted. Lovely. Really quite simple. For parallel exercise 9 on the MySQL platform, all we need to do is convert our fairly simple delete query and the create statement for the procedure over to the structure of syntax needed for MySQL. It's really very similar. So for our create procedure, let's go ahead and add the parameter. And so it's going to take an input parameter of ordnum of type integer. And let's add a begin block. And for every begin block, we need a matching end block. And let's specify our delimiter. And then remember to set our delimiter back when we're done. There we go. and change the parameter reference. And that should be it. Let's give it a try. Oh, again, I've forgotten to, since I started this session before the video, I forgot to set the schema that I'm using. So let's say use Candy. Run that selection. And let's try it now. Oh, this was not commented out, and it should have been. Okay, so my suspicion is that this actually ran correctly and created the procedure, and then it hit that error, so let's check it. Yes, it did. So I'll tell you what let's do. Let's have a little extra practice in dropping the delete order procedure. And let's rerun this again. Now it's all run perfectly with no complaint. And now let's go ahead and take a look again on the MySQL database. We had previously added a order number 8888. So let's make sure that it exists. Let's run that selection. And there it is, it exists. And now if we call our procedure for delete order, specifying order number 8888, that should delete it. And if we then call the stored procedure to display it, we should get no rows returned. Let's run that selection. And it's working exactly as we wish.
Parallel exercise 10. Use the Candy database. Write a stored procedure that will change the price of a product with a given product number. Name your stored procedure USP CHG prod price.
In parallel exercise 10, we're going to build a stored procedure based on an update query. And so let's look at the heart of that update query. And we're going to update the product table. And what we're going to do is we're going to set a new price. And the price is going to equal some parameter. Let's call it new price. And the selection filter is where the product number is equal to a value provided in a parameter called @prodnum. All right, so let's go ahead and form the create statement for that, and let's specify and declare the parameters that we're going to be passing in. So @prodnum, and product numbers should be a char 13 if you look at that field definition. And the new price should be a decimal 92. Okay, and so we're going to declare this new procedure as defined by the query we've just written. And so let's go ahead and test that and see if that is working. Let me make sure that I've got the current schema set. Let's say use Candy, and let's just execute that statement. Okay, so I've got the schema set. Let me go ahead and clear the result window. And let's go ahead and run this query. And as expected, there are no rows returned and no rows altered, but there's also no warnings. And if we go in and check, we should see that USP change prod price, USP change prod price has been added. So let's go ahead and actually test that stored procedure. And so we'll do that by executing the stored procedure, and let's for 100, let's make the change to 0.39. And then to see the result of that, let's select that product number 100 back out. So let's highlight just the piece we want to run and run that selection. And indeed, we see product number 100, which is described as 100 grand. That's a 100 grand candy bar. Manufacturer number 5, on hand 9,216. Warehouse 1, and the price has been changed to 0.39, showing that our stored procedure operated correctly. Now let's address parallel exercise 10 for the MySQL platform. And again, this is going to be taking a simple update query and parameterizing it to make it reusable as a stored procedure. So let's start with the update set where statement. So we're going to update the product table. We're going to set the price to new price, which is a parameter to be provided to us, where the product num equals product num, which is, again, prod num is going to be a parameter provided to us. So let's go ahead and complete the statement for creating the stored procedure by adding the parameters to it. And so we need to specify each parameter as an input or output parameter. This is an in parameter called prod num, and it has a data type of char 13, and there's going to be an input parameter named new price, and that is going to be a decimal data type of 92. And then let's see, we always want to have a begin block, and for every begin block there should be an end block. And if we're going to use this as our delimiter denoting the end block, we need to go ahead and specify that we're using that delimiter. And when we're done, we should set it back to the usual system delimiter, which is a semicolon. And let's go ahead and test that and see if that's working. Great, I got no rows returned or affected, no warnings. That should mean that that was created correctly. And we can take a look at the Candy database schema and see that we have indeed added USP change prod price, and that seems to be constructed correctly. Now let's test to make sure it actually operates correctly. And so we can call the stored procedure, and for product 100, we'll change the price to 0.39. And then let's go ahead and run a query after that happens to output that row and see that indeed the price has changed to 0.39. As a matter of fact, we could run this query ahead of time, see if it already exists. Well, it should already exist. Let's see what the price is currently. So let's just run this selection. So we can see the current price is 0.36, so 36 cents a piece. Now let's go ahead and run our stored procedure and then call that query again and see that the price has changed. And indeed it has. We're now at 39 cents a piece, up from 36 cents a piece. So that is working correctly.
Thank you for watching. Please visit beckplanet.com/books for additional free student and instructor learning resources, a free ebook copy of Beck's Introduction to SQL Programming, that Pelican database book, and to learn more about print editions of the textbook and workbook.